Imagine being betrayed by the very people sworn to protect you. This is the harrowing story of a black woman who faced the unimaginable, a racist police officer tying her to train tracks in a despicable act of hatred. But this isn't just a tale of cruelty, it's one of resilience, courage, and ultimate revenge. In the quiet outskirts of a small town, what started as a routine day turned into a nightmare. With nowhere to run and the sound of an approaching train growing louder, her fate seemed sealed. But what happened next changed everything. This woman's journey from victim to victor will leave you speechless. Her strength in the face of pure evil is a testament to the power of the human spirit. Stay tuned to uncover how she turned the tables in a way no one could have ever imagined. It all started on a quiet evening when she was pulled over on a deserted road. She was just heading home, the day's wait behind her, when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was a routine stop, something minor, maybe a broken taillight. But the officer's demeanor quickly shifted from professional to hostile. His words were laced with contempt, his intentions far from just enforcing the law. She could feel something wasn't right, but there was no time to act. Before she knew it, he had her in handcuffs, dragging her to his patrol car. Fear and confusion raced through her mind, but she knew one thing: this wasn't about a traffic violation. The officer drove her to an abandoned stretch of railroad tracks. The air was cold, heavy with dread, as she was forced out of the car. What happened next would haunt her forever. The officer's grip tightened as he forced her closer to the tracks. Her heart pounded, every beat echoing in her ears as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. She tried to plead, her voice trembling, but he didn't listen. Instead, he smirked, his actions fueled by a dark hatred that sent chills down her spine. The railroad tracks stretched endlessly in both directions, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the faint rustle of trees. She could feel the cold steel against her wrists as he tied her down, the sound of the ropes cutting through the silence. Every second felt like an eternity, her mind racing with thoughts of her family, her life, and how it had come to this. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint hum of an approaching train. The officer stood there, watching her with a twisted sense of satisfaction. But what he didn't know was that this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The rumble of the train grew louder, shaking the ground beneath her. She strained against the ropes, her wrists raw from the effort, but they wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to consume her, but deep inside, a fierce determination began to take hold. She wasn't going to let this be the end, not like this. As the train's horn blared in the distance, her mind raced, searching for any way out. Her eyes darted around the tracks, looking for something, anything she could use. Then, in the corner of her eye, she spotted a jagged piece of metal half buried in the gravel nearby. It was just out of reach, but hope flickered. The officer, thinking he had won, turned his back for a moment, laughing to himself. That moment was all she needed. She twisted her body, stretching with every ounce of strength she had, her fingers brushing against the edge of the metal. The train's lights pierced through the darkness, and time seemed to freeze as she fought for her life. Her fingers finally closed around the sharp edge of the metal, and with shaking hands, she began sawing at the ropes. The sound of the train was deafening now, its headlights blazing closer, casting long shadows around her. The officer, hearing the noise of her struggle, spun around and froze. His smug grin faded as he realized she wasn't as helpless as he had assumed. She managed to cut through one of the ropes just as the train came into view, its horn screaming through the night. But before she could free herself completely, the officer lunged toward her, his face twisted with rage. The ground trembled violently, and the train's light blinded them both as it hurtled closer. In that split second, another noise cut through the chaos. A distant shout. Someone else was there. The officer froze again, startled, and turned toward the sound. For the first time, his confidence wavered. But who was it? And would they reach her in time? The shouting grew louder, cutting through the roar of the train. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, a passerby who had seen the patrol car parked near the tracks and stopped to investigate. The officer, momentarily distracted, hesitated, giving her the chance she desperately needed. With one final effort, she tore through the last of the ropes and rolled off the tracks just as the train thundered past, missing her by inches. The officer turned back to her, furious, but before he could act, the stranger called out again, now holding up a phone. They had been recording everything. The officer's face went pale as the realization dawned on him. His actions had been captured, and there was no escaping the truth. But as she stood up, shaken but alive, she did something no one expected. Instead of lashing out, she looked him in the eye and said, "You won't break me." Her words, filled with strength and defiance, hung in the air. The stranger immediately called for help, ensuring that justice would be served. And just like that, her story became one of survival and a fight for accountability, a story that will inspire many to stand up against injustice. The officer was swiftly arrested, his actions exposed for the world to see. The video recorded by the stranger became undeniable evidence, sparking outrage and calls for justice. For her, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about ensuring no one else would ever face what she did. She worked with her community to shine a light on corruption and build a platform for change, her voice becoming a beacon of hope for others who had been silenced. Though the scars of that night remained, they became symbols of her strength. She refused to let fear define her, channeling her pain into power. The stranger who saved her that night became a trusted ally, standing by her side as she fought for accountability. Her story wasn't just one of survival. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and unity can lead to justice, and her resilience inspired a movement.